back, and here we are in our Secrets of Prophecy series. Today is seminar number 3, which is entitled Signs of the Times. Hi, my name is Adam, and it is my privilege to welcome you to this message today. It is a very, very exciting topic that we are going to look at, especially in the challenging times that our world is facing today. This topic, Signs of the Times, helps us to make a lot of sense out of our world today. And you know, something that has been of interest to people for thousands of years is astrology. You know, and even today, celebrities, politicians, and millions of people try and determine and work out their future by looking into astrology. And look, it is not a new thing. Did you know the ancient Babylonians, they used to look at the stars as well, and this is where it originated from. They believed that the stars and planets were gods and goddesses, and that they could read the stars in order to receive future guidance for the future from these so-called gods and goddesses. And this is where it all came about. But really, is astrology an art or is it a science? And how accurate are the predictions? Look, regardless of what your views are in astrology, there is something that we cannot deny. And that is the creator of the stars points us to something more accurate in predicting the future. He points us to Bible prophecy. That is right. The Bible is the most accurate source in helping us to determine and know the future. And that is why you are really going to be blessed today. We are going to see our world described exactly. So our first question, let's get right into it. What did Jesus say was more important than being able to read the heavens? Now, before I share this text with you, let me give you just a little bit of background concerning this passage here that we're about to look at. Jesus is talking with the religious leaders of that time. And you know, they would read the heavens, and they would read signs in the sky to help them determine the weather forecast. And so Jesus is referring to them reading the sky in order to determine the weather forecast. And he's showing them how they read the sky, yet they neglect seeing the prophecies within the Bible that point to Jesus. Let's have a look at this text. Matthew 16, verses 2 and 3. When it is evening, you say it will be fair weather, for the sky is red, and in the morning it will be foul weather today, for the sky is red and threatening. Hypocrites, you know how to discern the face of the sky, but you cannot discern the signs of the times. So here they are. They say, if the sky is red at night, it's going to be a great weather tomorrow. And if the sky is red and threatening in the morning, then the weather is going to turn bad. And, you know, that has been common knowledge for thousands of years. And here these men, they knew, they understood this. But one thing they did not understand was the prophecies in the Bible. Because they didn't understand Jesus. They didn't understand who he was. And they didn't understand what he was doing. And Jesus is trying to get them to an awareness of what the Bible has to say about him, so that they could see who Jesus really is. Because they missed the point completely. The leaders totally missed who Jesus is. They missed it completely. And what Jesus is saying here is that you cannot discern the signs of the times because the scriptures were telling them that Jesus was the Son of God and he was to arrive at exactly the time that he arrived. And this is a more deeper and detailed prophecy that we're going to look at in just a few series down the track. The signs of Jesus' first coming, recorded in the Old Testament scriptures, some scholars have estimated that the Old Testament contains over 300 specific prophecies describing who the Messiah is and what he will do. 300 prophecies that these men missed. And Jesus is trying to get their attention. Question 2. What specific signs were the disciples of Christ most interested in? And this is very fascinating here, because now we go into a sermon that Jesus gave on the Mount of Olives, which is recorded in Matthew chapter 24. Also recorded in Mark and Luke as well. He says here in Matthew 24 verse 3, the disciples come to Jesus and they say, "Tell us, when will these things be, and what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age?" You see, Jesus had taken them to this Mount of Olives, and he had been pointing them to the temple. And he had told them that this temple is going to be destroyed, in which it was. And 40 years later, this temple was destroyed after Jesus said so. And the disciples perceived this destruction of the temple as the end of the world. To them, to their mind, if the temple was going to be destroyed, then they could not see an end. And so they come to Jesus and they ask him, "Tell us these things. When will these things be? Tell us. And what are going to be the signs of your coming?" They want to know, what are we going to look at? How are we going to know when you come? What signs are going to indicate that your coming is near? This is what the disciples want to know. And Jesus goes on to tell them. The disciples asked Jesus to tell them what signs or signals would indicate the second coming and the end of the world. We're going to look at these signs now, but before we do, there is a statement. I want us to look at a statement that Jesus made, which is very, very important for the times in which we are living in. It's under question 3. Does anyone know the exact date of Jesus coming? Does anyone know the exact date of Jesus coming? Well, from the words of Jesus himself, in Matthew 24 verse 36, Jesus said, "But of the day and hour no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, but my Father only." From the words of Jesus himself, he says, of that day and hour, no one knows. No one. So don't let anybody try and tell you that they know the date when Jesus will come. Because Jesus said, no one knows. Not even the angels, but the Father only. He knows. He's the only one who knows the exact day and hour that Jesus will come. Because you know what? Many people have tried to predict the time and the year and the date in which Jesus would come. And it's interesting, one author described it this way, J. Gordon Melton. He said, everyone who predicted the end of the world had one thing in common. They were wrong. They were wrong. And anyone who tries to predict the end will be wrong. But even though we cannot know the exact time, the exact day and hour time and year that Jesus is going to come, there is something that we can know. There is something that Jesus has given us so that we do have an idea that it is near. And put it this way, before we move on, what would your faith be like if you did know the time in which Jesus would come? You know, it would be interesting, wouldn't it? Especially leading up to the time if it was known. You see, people would put it off. People would put off having a relationship with Jesus until that time. But you know what? We need to be aware, we need to watch always. Because something that is really, really interesting is that every generation since Jesus has believed that Jesus is coming in their generation. The apostles, they believed that Jesus was coming back in their lifetime. And even as far back as I can remember, the people of God have always been prepared, thinking that Jesus is going to come in their lifetime. And you want to know something? Jesus comes in everyone's lifetime. Interesting thought, eh? Let me explain myself. Jesus comes in everyone's lifetime because once you get to the end of your life, that is it. You fall asleep, and we're going to study much more about this in upcoming seminars in the Secrets of Prophecy series. But you fall asleep, you die, and the next moment you wake, you see Jesus. You see? And this is the very interesting thing. And this is why we don't need to know the day or the hour. We just need to be always ready. Because we can never really tell, or we can never really know when it might come to an end. Well, some people do. If you maybe have a terminal illness and the doctor gives you a time frame in which you can live, and a lot of people have lived according to that time frame and then passed, and there have been people who have not lived, who have outlived the time frame that were given to them by doctors. But regardless of all of that, our life could just end just like that, couldn't it? A car accident, a virus, anything could just bring our life to an end instantly. And the next thing we know, Jesus is coming. And so we always need to be ready. But it was never ever given to man to know the exact time that Jesus will come. But something was given to us. Let's have a look. Question 4. Can we know when the return of Jesus is near? Okay, Matthew 24 verses 32 and 33. It's Jesus is saying the words of Jesus again. Now learn this parable from the fig tree. When its branch has already become tender and puts forth leaves, you know that summer is near. So you also, when you see all these things, know that it is near, at the doors. Wow. Just like the fig tree, Jesus drew the illustration of the fig tree when it puts forth its tender shoots and its leaves, and we know it's springtime and summer's near. And right now, at the time of recording this video, we are in the middle of autumn. And we can go outside and we can look at the color of the leaves and the trees turning brown and orange and falling to the ground. We know that it's autumn. We know that winter is near because of the signs that we see in nature. And so Jesus said, when you see these signs taking place, these signs that I have given you, you will know that it's near. You cannot know the day or the hour, the exact time, but you can know that it's close. You can know it's close, he said. And so, just as there were many prophecies regarding the first coming of Jesus, those 300 prophecies that were referred to, there are also clear prophecies relating to the second coming of Jesus. Question 5. What illustration does Jesus use when describing the signs of Christ's return? This is very important. This illustration that Jesus gives, because that helps us to put these signs into perspective, to really work it out. All right? And to really actually see how they are being fulfilled. Matthew 24 verse 8. Jesus says, all these are the beginning of sorrows. All these are the beginning of sorrows. Now, this is the King James Version and the New King James. Of course, this is the New King James Version of the Bible. It gives the word sorrows. But the Greek word for this word sorrows actually means the sorrow that a woman experiences during birth pain, when she's, getting ready to give birth. Let me explain it a bit more with this slide. The word sorrow comes from the Greek word odin, which literally means the beginning of birth pains. Now, birth contractions increase in frequency and intensity the closer we come to the event, which is the arrival of the baby. And it is the same with the signs of Christ's return. And I was thankful to be able to watch my wife give birth to 2 wonderful, healthy little babies. And they're not so little anymore. But as I held her hand and sat by her side as she went through her labor process to the arrival of my children, I observed the contractions, and I was fascinated by the whole process. And I observed these contractions start small and far apart. But as we got closer and closer to the birth of these children, these babies, the contractions became stronger and more intense and closer together. And they would come much closer and much stronger, much more intense and closer and intense and closer and intense, until next thing you know, out come my babies, my beautiful children. And this is what Jesus likens these signs to labor pains. And when we look at these signs and we examine them in the context of these labor pains, you will just look at our world today and just be blown out of your mind. It is unbelievable how close we are to the coming of Jesus. It is close. We don't know the day or the hour. We don't know the time when he comes. But we know that we are in the time of Jesus coming. We know it's coming soon because of the signs are very clear. What are some of the signs then? Question 6. Associated with the very last days before Jesus returns. Well, what we're going to examine now, we're going to examine some signs in different parts of the world. We're going to see signs in the political world, and we're sure are seeing them right now too. As I speak, we are seeing signs in the political world. We'll see signs in the physical world, and as I speak, we are seeing massive signs in the physical world. And might I just add, at the time of filming, we're in level 4 lockdown in New Zealand because of the coronavirus, and in trying to shut down the coronavirus and stamp it out of this part of the world. And so we'll see signs in the physical world, we'll see signs in the business world, we'll see signs in the social world, and signs in the religious world. We will indeed. So let's get into it. Signs in the political world. War. All right. Question 6. What are some of the signs associated with the very last days before Jesus returns? Matthew 24, 6 and 7. And you will hear of wars and rumors of wars, for nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom. Well, do we see that today? Of course we do. And all we need to do is just have a brief look at history. Okay, last century saw 2 world wars. And so this century, let's hope we don't have a world war. But one thing I do know is that this is true. These words of Jesus. You will hear of wars and rumors of wars. Nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom. And anyway, let's just have a bit of a look at our world today anyway. There are 30 wars every year. There are $100 million spent on war every hour. There's 80 times more on war. That's 80 times more money on war than what is required to provide water and sanitation to the whole world. And the world has 27,000 nuclear bombs in stock and growing continually. Let's just look at it in light of these birth pains as well. Remember the birth pains? In Jesus' day, how did they fight wars in Jesus' day? Okay, they carried swords and shields. And they would go into battle with their swords, with their spears, or with their archers. And let's look at today. Look at how war has intensified today. You know, it was interesting. I heard a story once about the man who invented the very first machine gun. Okay, it was called the Gatling gun because it was named after him. His surname was Gatling. His first name has just slipped my mind right now, but he was Mr. Gatling, and he invented this Gatling gun. You know, the old machine gun with the handle, and you turn it, and the bullets are. And I read a story about the unveiling of the Gatling gun. And there were a lot of influential people there in this public place when they unveiled this machine gun. And afterwards, after he had explained it and unveiled it, a man came to him and he said, "Why would you want to create such a weapon to cause so much destruction and bloodshed? I mean, aren't wars worse enough as it is? Aren't wars bad enough as it is?" And his reply to this man was simple. He said, "This gun will put an end to war." Wow. He believed that this weapon was so terrifying that it would put an end to war. Was he right? Well, of course not. Of course not. He has made war bloodier and more frightening than ever as a result of this weapon. But even look how the weapons have intensified. We get a lot of war is fought from the air as well. Dropping bombs. And also with nuclear weapons. At the push of a button, a whole country can be wiped out. In fact, the whole world could be wiped out at the push of a button. And so war has definitely intensified. And especially another way war is intensified is terrorism. Have a look at this, Luke 21, verses 25 and 26. "And on the earth, distress of nations, men's hearts failing them from fear, and the expectation of those things which are coming on the earth." Terrorism, people's hearts failing them for fear. And, since September 11, we have had massive amounts of terrorist attacks. It's generated fear. Even there was a point where the terrorist attacks were so frequent that people couldn't even walk around and feel safe walking down the street in a city, in a Western country like the US or London or anywhere like that because of terrorism. And so War has definitely intensified, and it has been more frequent as well. As I referred to before, last century, 2 world wars. Jesus goes on to say, Matthew 24 verse 7, we already looked at the first part of this, for nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom. And then Jesus introduces 3 other things that will take place. Wars, okay, kingdom against kingdom, and there will be famines, pestilences, and earthquakes in various places. So we have these 4 things: wars, famines, pestilences, and earthquakes in various places all over the world. And these things will occur, as Jesus said, like birth pains upon a woman. Did you know that 2 billion people do not get enough food today? Right? Like if you live in a country like I do, New Zealand, or any other Western country, you have plenty. But not every country is as fortunate as yours. 2 billion people do not get enough food. The global population has increased to over 7 billion. That spells trouble, as we'll see shortly. Half the world will have critical water shortage in 20 years. And even now, 3,000 people die each day from a mosquito bite. And the world is fast running out of energy, coal, oil, and gas. So let's have a look at these things. We've looked at wars, kingdom against kingdom, but let's look at famines. And it's interesting because, we see famines in other countries, and the way the world operates today, we're a lot more connected, and famines, especially in the Western world, famines don't hurt a country like they would have many years ago in the past. You see, Australia has just gone through one of the worst famines in its history, one of the worst droughts, and is still going through this drought in known history. We see in the Bible describes a drought as a famine. And that would bring a lot of problems, to that region. Because what they would do in Bible times, they would just live off the very ground that was around them, surrounding them. But because we can ship and freight, different fruit and vegetables and foods, products, a famine doesn't hurt as much as what it would have in biblical times. And I live in Auckland, in the city of Auckland, and it rains a lot in Auckland. But Auckland has just had its driest summer ever on record. And Auckland's dams are below 50% full. And so the government is asking us to conserve water because our dams are low. And so we still see famines going on around the world. But the biggest famine is still to come, and it's probably not far off, especially for a lot of countries. Probably not so much here in New Zealand, because the country where I live, New Zealand, it produces more food than its population consumes, right? But there are other parts of the world that do not. And so we're just like a little country of 5 million people tucked away in the corner of the earth. And it's not overpopulated, but there are countries that are overpopulated. There are countries that suffer under severe famine. And I want to share with you a concept called Earth Overshoot Day. Okay? And what Earth Overshoot Day is, it actually is the day in which humanity uses up all the resources that the Earth can produce in 1 year. Okay, so the Earth produces so many resources in 1 year, and Earth Overshoot Day is the day in which Earth's population uses up all those resources that the Earth can produce in a year. Let's have a look a bit further into it. Okay, we use more ecological resources and services than nature can regenerate. Through overfishing, over-harvesting forests, and emitting more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere than forests can sequester, humans are demanding more from the earth than it can produce. And so every year, we are using up these resources faster and faster and faster. Every year. Look at this graph here. All right. This is from 1970 to 2019. And you can see here in 1970, we were just using what the earth could reproduce. But let's look at it. Let's go down to our very day. Look at 2018, for example. In 2018, Earth Overshoot Day was on August the 1st. In 2019, Earth Overshoot Day was July the 29th. So it is getting shorter and shorter and shorter every year. And so what we are basically doing in a year, we are using the resources that 1.75 Earths can produce. All right? So the resources that we are using them up every year faster and faster and faster and faster and faster. And, you know, it's like someone going into debt until suddenly they can't pay and they're bankrupt. This is what we're doing to our earth, you see. And through our overpopulation, we are using up the resources in the earth. And we're on a trajectory, right, in which we are going to get to a point where we've just used up everything in the earth. And the earth just cannot produce the demand that is placed upon it from the population. And so it's coming. But let's hope Jesus comes before that. All right. Pestilence. Okay, we've looked at wars, famines, pestilence. And in the Bible, the word pestilence, it means like either a plague of locusts, or a disease. All right. And haven't we seen diseases? Especially since 2000. What have we seen? 2002, we saw West Nile virus. 2003, the SARS epidemic. 2005 was the bird flu. 2006 was E. coli. 2009 was the swine flu. 2014 was Ebola. 2016 was the Zika virus. And 2019 to 20, right now, currently, at the time of filming, we're in the middle of the world battling the coronavirus. Wow. Have the diseases like the birth pains? All right, this is a big one. Never in my lifetime has the country I've lived in ever had to lock down the population. Never. This is a real crisis in which we're facing. And it's a sign, Jesus said. It's like a birth pain. It's a really big birth pain. And while the whole world is preoccupied with the coronavirus, in East Africa, there is a locust plague and it's devouring everything. And as in Africa, as they call on the West to help them, bring them in resources so they can battle this plague, the West can't respond quick enough because it is bogged down with the coronavirus. And this thing is only getting worse. And so we see these plagues like birth pains upon a woman, the coronavirus, the worst one. And, you know, I just look at this year. We are seeing massive birth pains with the drought in Australia, with the fires in Australia, and with the locusts, with the coronavirus. And there's even been some earthquakes. There's been earthquakes in New Zealand, which we're going to now. Earthquakes. Let's look at earthquakes. Earthquakes have risen in recordings from 2000 in total up until the 19th century to a figure of 500,000 detected quakes per year. Man, look at this graph here. This is the worldwide earthquakes, right? This is in 10-year increments. Okay, from the 1900s to 2019. Since 1970, or the 1970s, the scientists have been able to record earthquakes much more effectively than previous because of the instruments that they have for measuring earthquakes and the things that they have in place. Since this technology has been introduced, we are seeing every year, we are seeing more and more and more earthquakes. And we are seeing more intense earthquakes. And so this is it in decades. Okay, let's just take it from the 1950s. And we can see this rise. Every decade, more and more and more earthquakes. Look at this graph here. These are worldwide deadly and destructive earthquakes from the US Geological Survey website, which is the main scientific body that studies earthquakes globally. And these are just deadly and destructive earthquakes. Look at it. Look, since 2000. You know, since just in the last 20 years, the rise in destructive earthquakes. And this is from this next graph is from my own study. And I was just playing around with some data. I was getting off the US Geological Survey website. And I just plotted them in a spreadsheet and I produced a chart. These were the deaths from earthquakes since 1980 to 2010. And this was some years ago when I put this together. And look at the deaths, you know, especially in the last 20 years. Look at the rise here. This is phenomenal. All right, talk about birth pains. Wow, this is huge. And you know why these are so big? Tsunamis. Here we have within this data, we have 3 tsunamis and a big earthquake that took place in China. Earthquakes generating tsunamis that are just killing thousands of people. Thousands. And even Jesus said this in Luke 21, which is where it's Luke 21 that records this same sermon that Jesus gave in Matthew 24. It says here, and there will be signs in the sun, in the moon and the stars, and on the earth, distress of nations, with perplexity, the sea and the waves roaring. Wow, how specific is that? Have we seen distress of nations, with the waves and the sea roaring? Boy, haven't we ever. There are images that I see that I can't get out of my mind. You know, of these big waves coming and crashing upon these poor innocent people. We are seeing birth pains, all right. Strong birth pains. Jesus is coming soon. He really is. And now we're going to move into signs in the business world. All right, James 5:1-8. It says, "Come now, you rich, weep and howl for your miseries that are coming upon you." Money's not going to mean a thing when Jesus comes. And this is what James is getting at. "You have heaped up treasure in the last days. Indeed, the wages of the laborers who mowed your fields, which you have kept back by fraud, cry out. And the cries of the reapers have reached the ears of the Lord. You have lived on the earth in pleasure and luxury. You also be patient. Establish your hearts, for the coming of the Lord is at hand." And so we have a message here to wealthy people who have gotten rich at the expense of the poor. And we have seen that time and time again in our world today. Here we find rich men taking advantage of the low wages of the poor while they live in luxury. Let's have a look in the more in the business world. Increased knowledge. And there's a very fascinating passage here in Daniel chapter 12, verse 4. And it says, God is speaking to Daniel, "But you, Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book until the time of the end. Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall increase." Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall increase. Now, something really interesting about this passage here, it's actually referring to the Bible. All right, it's talking about many running to and fro in the Bible and knowledge of the Bible increasing. And the Bible really has done that in the time of the end. The book of Daniel refers to the time of the end, and we can calculate the prophecies in which we will do in one of these seminars, in a future seminar. And the time of the end began around 1844. And we have seen an explosion of Bible knowledge since then, and the Bible prophecies. But if we look at it and apply it to our world today, it is very, very interesting as well. Because especially since that time of the end, around the middle of the 19th century, we have seen an increase in knowledge, an explosion in knowledge, and people running to and fro. What was the main source of transport 100 years ago? Horse and cart, or by foot. You know, if I wanted to get into Auckland City, I live in South Auckland, and if I want to get into Auckland City, 100 years ago, it probably would have taken me all day. Now I can get there in less than half an hour, depending on Auckland traffic. But I could get there in half an hour, just like that. I can travel the whole country of New Zealand in a day, and I could even get to one end of New Zealand and another in an hour. And I could get from one side of the world to the other side of the world in less than a day. Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall increase. Hasn't knowledge increased just in my lifetime? You know, it was interesting. The other day, I thought of a TV show that I used to watch when I was a kid. And it was like this show was aired like in the early 90s. And it was called Beyond 2000. And what it would look at technology into the 21st century, right? Into the year 2000 and beyond. And it would look at technology and what was coming and what we could look forward to and expect to see in that. And my mind thought about that. And so I brought up one of the episodes on YouTube and I watched it with my son. And we were fascinated by it. We were fascinated by it because it was looking at the camera, you know, and it was showing at the time photos were taken with the roll of film, you know, that you would insert into the back of a camera. And it was looking and it was projecting how we could get photos onto a CD-ROM and what we could do with photos on a CD-ROM. And this was a show just in my lifetime, not even 30 years ago, that was looking into the 21st century, and the technology that we have today completely outdates it. It was bizarre. It was bizarre when you just consider how technology and knowledge has just exploded in our lifetime, in my lifetime. It's unreal. And a week's worth of the New York Times contains more information than the average person would come across in an entire lifetime living in the 18th century. A week's worth. We are bombarded with knowledge. There is an increase of knowledge. People are running to and fro, and it all began in this time period, this time of the end. I want to just get this. I found this video quite fascinating. I want to put it on here. The quality's not so good because I actually recorded it off my computer screen on my phone. But I want to show you here, and it doesn't really apply at the moment because a lot of countries are locked down, you know, because of the coronavirus. But I'm sure in a year or two, as things get under control, or as a vaccine is discovered, that things will get back to normal in terms of air traffic. But this video is fascinating, and it shows you air traffic on the earth in a 24-hour period. So I want you to look at this and just have a look and see if these words that Daniel wrote have come true, that many shall run to and fro in the time of the end.
Here's an extraordinary fact. Right now, as you watch this, 500,000 human beings are in the sky, many of them high above the clouds in the thin air of the lower stratosphere. Here's where they are at this moment, aboard the thousands of planes that crisscross the world simultaneously. And here's how they moved across the skies in the last 24 hours, based on live data that even takes account of delays to individual flights. Each day sees a similar global dance, as the sun rises on each region, so the takeoffs and landings begin. In Asia, then Europe, then America, and then Asia once again. Only on the dead of night do the skies clear a little. Plotting all the routes flown in a single day reveals the interconnectedness of the modern world and the uneven distribution of those connections. There are dense webs above Europe, the US, and East Asia, but the skies are much emptier over Africa and South America. Explore the map and then press continue to see how we got here.
All right, let's have a look at signs in the social world. We see a moral collapse. We see a decline in morals. Let's have a look at Jesus, the words of Jesus again in Matthew 24:37. He says, "But as the days of Noah were, so also will the coming of the Son of Man be." Just like it was in the time of Noah, so it will be right before Jesus comes. Well, what was it like then in the times of Noah? Well, let's go to Genesis and have a look. Genesis 6 verse 5. It says here that the Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intent of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. Wow. That's how it was in the time of Noah. Wickedness of man was great. Evil continually. Self-pleasing continually. You know what? We live in a world today that doesn't want to know God. It wants to throw God out. It wants to do its own thing. And you know, I live in a very blessed country, New Zealand, which I've mentioned many times already today. But while the coronavirus was coming and taking over, and New Zealand was working out plans to counteract that disease, something they were pushing through at exactly the same time was legalizing abortion. And bang, the coronavirus hit us, and bang, the government puts out a law legalizing abortion. And morals are just decaying every day. You know, we see this country, New Zealand, it was one of the first countries to allow homosexuals to marry. And look, and don't get me wrong, please, I love my homosexual friends. I have homosexual friends. I've studied the Bible with homosexuals, and you know, I treat them just like anybody else. I don't discriminate against them. But the Bible is clear, and the Bible tells us that man should not be with man and woman should not be with woman. And yet countries are just allowing it to happen. The nations are just going away from God. You know, it's very interesting how schools don't want the Bible. They don't want the Bible in schools. But you know where they'll have the Bible? You know where there'll be no problem getting the Bible into? Into jails. All right? Okay, no, we don't want it in schools. But hey, we'll welcome it in jails. You know why? Because the Bible changes lives. It helps people to reform. And you know what? If we had the Bible in schools, there would most likely be less people in jail. If it has the power to transform, it has the power to prevent as well. We live in a world that is embracing evolution theory. Throw God out. It's a self-pleasing world. It's a world that loves sin and pleasure. It's a world that loves entertainment. And it doesn't want God. And that's where the moral decay is coming. By putting God out of the picture, bringing in laws that go against God's book, the Bible. And countries that were established on biblical principles are now doing away with the Bible. Jesus said, this is what it will be like just before my coming, he said. So it's no surprise. 2 Timothy 3 verses 1 to 5. And here Paul gives a list mentioned by the Apostle Paul to Timothy. And we're going to just look at 2 items in this list. But it's signs in the social world. And this is this preoccupation with pleasure. Also that comes with throwing God out and sin and wickedness and evil thinking. But know this, that in the last days perilous times will come, for men will be lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God. Paul gives a big list. If you look at it in your own Bible, you'll see quite a list of things. But we're just going to put 2 up on the screen. This one here, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God. And that is just so right. You know, the world today loves pleasure. It loves self-pleasing rather than it loves the things of God. And another one, the perilous times will come, for men will be disobedient to parents. And we see that so much more today. You know, we have generations of kids that want to call the shots. And look, I'm not surprised as well, because, you know, my children are growing up and I have teenagers now. But whenever we would kind of look for a movie, we never watched a lot of movies. Okay, we did the Bible, but Saturday night would kind of be a movie night for us, and we would try and find a movie, and my wife and I would try and look for a good, wholesome movie that we could watch. But you know what? It was so hard to find a kids' movie where the children did not disobey their parents. Have a look at that. If you have children and you watch children's movies, you have a look at how many times the parents are disobeyed in the movies. And the movies, they make the parents out to look like they're stupid. And the movies have the children disobeying and then hailing the children as heroes because of their disobedience. And this is really, really dangerous, you know, because children need the guidance of their parents. And when they watch these movies and they're watching film after film after film, which is showing that the children's thinking is right and the parents are stupid, it's brainwashing the kids into thinking that they are right and they shouldn't listen to their parents because the kid knows better. But if you are a parent, you know that you know better. And you know that your child's mind is still developing and your child needs your guidance. I get quite passionate about this because it's one thing that I am passionate about. And you know, and this is the thing. This is it, and we see this today, and we see this reflected in the behavior of children today. And it's a dreadful thing because children need their parents. They need their guidance. They need their parents to help them to navigate life and understand life and work life out. Because kids can't do it on their own. And so please, if you watch movies with your children, your family, look into those movies before you watch them. Because they're there to lead your children astray even more. We see in the social world, again, still looking in the social world, a breakdown in love relationships. The words of Jesus, Matthew 24:12, and because lawlessness will abound, the love of many will grow cold. And it will, because of this lawlessness, because of this doing away with God, the love of people will grow cold. The love towards others, the love in relationships. And we see that as well. If you look at the last 100 years, the divorce statistics. And it's 50%. Around half of all marriages will end in divorce. Because the love of many will grow cold. Love towards God will grow cold. Love towards each other will grow cold. We see signs in the religious world. And we see people ridiculing the second coming of Jesus. We see it in the Bible, and don't we see it? 2 Peter chapter 3 verses 3 and 4. It says, knowing this first, that scoffers will come in the last days, walking according to their own lusts, and saying, where is the promise of his coming? We see that. Go down the street and pick random people and ask them what they think about Jesus coming today again. And the majority will scoff at you and think it's a fairy tale. When we are seeing signs that Jesus has given us in our world today that show that he is just so near and people are so unawares. And you know, I'm passionate. I want to warn people. I want people to see what the Bible says. I want people to pay attention to this book. Because this is the only way. This is the only navigation tool we have to get through this earth and get out of this earth. And if we do not, we will end up in destruction with the earth. And we need to know, we need people to look at this, but people just want to scoff at it. Those lovers of pleasure, you know, those lovers of wickedness, they scoff at the idea that Jesus is coming again. We see in Matthew 24:24, Jesus said, for false Christs and false prophets will rise and show great signs and wonders to deceive, if possible, even the elect. And that is so true. We have seen so many leaders lead people to ruin. Cult leaders and other religious leaders leading people astray, leading people away from the Bible, leading people to their death. And Jesus said to watch out for it. And this movement of spiritualism, we see that as well in 1 Timothy 4 verse 1. Now the Spirit expressly says that in latter times some will depart from the faith, giving heed to deceiving spirits and doctrines of demons. And we see the spiritualism is as old as life itself. But especially today, there is an increasing interest in spiritualism. You know, people look to spiritualism because it allows them to enjoy these pleasures of sin rather than the things of God. We also get in a decline of genuine Christianity. Again, the Apostle Paul speaking to Timothy in 2 Timothy 3, 1-5. But know this, that in the last days perilous times will come. For men will be lovers of themselves, having a form of godliness but denying its power. It's one of those lists that Paul gives Timothy. Having a form of godliness but denying its power. And that is so true in our religious world today. You know, we have so many people and so many members of our churches that have this form of godliness. They want to do what's right, but they don't want to give everything to God. They don't want to give their whole life to God, but God wants all of you. He wants all of you for him. A lot of churches just want to make their worship hour an entertaining people. You know, we don't go to worship to be entertained. We go to commune with God and with each other and fellowship with each other. And also, Jesus said in the religious world, Jesus said in Matthew 24:14, he said, and this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in all the world as a witness to all the nations, and then the end will come. This is another sign that he has given, the gospel being preached in all the world as a witness to all the nations, and then the end will come. And you know what? The gospel is going to the world. The gospel is going quicker than ever. There are countries still that need to be opened up, but the gospel is moving, and people are getting access through technology and through the internet. People are getting access to the gospel. And we know once the gospel's preached to the world, the Bible tells us, then the end will come. Jesus has promised that once the gospel message has reached everyone in the world, the end will come. And it is up to us. Jesus has given it to us to take this gospel to the world. And this is the idea of these videos, to take this Bible message, this gospel message to the world. So don't just watch this and keep it to yourself. Share it with your friends. Share it with everybody. Share it on your social media accounts. Email it to your family members. Email it to your friends. Tell them to have a look and see what the Bible says about the world we are living in and how Jesus is the answer to all of our problems. Question 7. What is the greatest danger associated with the soon coming of Jesus? Matthew 24:44. Words of Jesus again. Therefore, you also be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour you do not expect. And this is what I was referring to earlier on in the program today. That our life could end any time. Jesus is coming any time, at a time we don't expect. So be ready. Be ready. Because we don't know when it comes. We don't know when our life is going to be over. So be ready so that you don't miss out. Question 8. How can we be ready for Jesus to come? Jesus says in Revelation 3:20, Behold, I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come into him and dine with him and he with me. Jesus is knocking on your heart. Open the door of your heart. Let him come in. Read his word. Dine with him through reading his word. And he will dine with you. He will speak to you. And he will bring to you his wonderful things, the things of God. And that is how you can be ready. 3 points to remember from today's study. No one knows exactly when Jesus will return. But the signs indicate that Jesus is coming soon. So be ready for Jesus. To be ready for Jesus, we need to prepare now. Is it your desire to prepare now to be ready for the second coming of Jesus? If so, would you like to ask Jesus to be your personal Savior and trust him to guide and direct your life? My answer is yes. I hope and pray you've answered yes. Let us pray, shall we? In loving Father in heaven, yes, Lord, it is our desire. We want you to come into our life. We want you to fill us, Lord, with your presence, with your love. Teach us your word with your holy by through your Holy Spirit, and work in our lives and make us like you. And Father, I pray for everybody who is watching this video. I pray that a blessing will be upon them. I pray that you will lead and guide in their lives. And I pray that they will know you better and they will be prepared for eternity because of this message. We thank you, Jesus, in your loving name. Amen. All right. Well, thank you for tuning in again. And keep moving through. There are exciting things that are taking place.